Now for our next panel, and we're going to obviously continue discussing connected TV, but this time cover a topic that's come up in both panels, measurement and return on investment. And I know many of you are wrestling with this issue in CTV, and I'm aware that there are many myths relating to CTV measurement. So it'll be fascinating to hear from our next panel, and I'm sure many myths will be dispelled. Don't forget to submit your questions for the panelists in the Q&A box located to the bottom of your Zoom window, and I'm delighted to introduce the moderator for this next session, Paul, who is SVP of Strategic Partnerships at Comscore. The virtual floor is yours, Paul.
There we go, unmuting. Thank you very much. There's certainly some expectation building around this panel if you've been listening since the start, since measurement seems to be the golden path to success that we need to tread. So luckily we've got three great speakers here to discuss this topic. Graeme Lynch, VP of Demand from SpotX, Dan White, Group Director EMEA from DoubleVerify, and Kristanne Roberts, Global Development Director from Kantar. So just to frame the discussion before I start throwing questions out to you, I think the measurement industry is, in a broader sense, outside just CTV, is facing a couple of big challenges. One, with the increasing demands of consumer privacy, the loss of cross-domain measurement, and the move to first-party data, that whole change that is affecting digital, but also flowing across into TV. And then the second is the demands of advertisers for true cross-media measurement. And we've seen the World Federation of Advertisers really banging the drum on this front and saying it's time that we see an end to the silos between the different forms of media and related measurement. So then when we come to the discussion on CTV, I'd like to break this into three pieces. First, let's focus on the verification. So ensuring that the ads are delivered in a brand safe and secure environment. Then looking more at the measurement around reach and frequency and how does that fit alongside other media, and then focusing on impact and ROI in terms of the brand impact and sales impact, and therefore what kind of KPIs and return on investment we should be looking at. So kicking off, Dan, so in the digital space, we are familiar with metrics that are designed to ensure that an ad was seen by a real person, such as viewability, fraud, and brand safety. What are the challenges to ensure that a CTV ad gets the opportunity to be seen in the appropriate context in TV?
So I think one of the things we need to look at, it came up in the previous panel. So there are some misconceptions, and this isn't in any way to denigrate CTV, it's awesome, but the reality is that we do see the same issues in CTV as we see in the broader digital ecosystem. One of the misconceptions is CTV impressions are inherently viewable by default. They're displayed on the big screen. This is not to say that cannot be the case. It is often the case, but we need to be vigilant to the fact that it isn't always going to be that way. An example that we have, and it's purely a technical setup thing, if you have it's entirely possible for an app to continue to record impressions as being served once a TV screen has actually been switched off. So we need to be mindful of the fact that even though that ad ran, it wasn't actually seen by a real human. There wasn't the opportunity because the screen was switched off. So you need to bear that in mind. And the other part of it as well is fraud. So it's a sad fact, but it's a reality of the digital ecosystem that fraudsters will move where the digital dollars go. So you also need to be mindful that there are many ways in which fraudsters will endeavour to pull advertising dollars away into their pockets without actually exposing ads to consumers. We're seeing that increase. I think it was a tenfold increase for January of this year in EMEA, as an example, versus January in last year. So these things do need to be taken into account. They need to be measured. They need to be removed from the ecosystem. And it was interesting, actually, in the last call that they were talking about brand suitability not being of a major concern. And I think that, again, is a misnomer. It's not accurate. One of the key things we're seeing is a lack of visibility into where ads are actually running. So it's all very well to show ads running at an app level, but the reality is that we know that within, certainly amongst the larger apps out there, you can have 1,000 different pieces of content. So what we need to be moving towards is the ability to understand not just the app that something ran in, but what specific content within the app, because we know that content can be very different. Some bits will be brand suitable for one brand and not for another, and vice versa. So these are the key things that we need to be looking out for.
Thank you. Graeme, can I ask you about whether you're seeing a greater demand for contextual targeting, or certainly around the whole brand safety space for CTV campaigns?
Yes, yeah, very much. And I think adding to what Dan says, I think brand safety is a key issue across all digital space. And I think one of the ways around it is to make sure who you're working with, So, you know, one of the things that we do, and by the way, we work with DoubleVerify, they're our platform, verify all of our CTV and online video, is to make sure you're working directly with the apps. And then one of the things we actually do with those apps is now start to drive what we call KVPs in the programmatic world, where we can understand the content by episode or by genre, and then that allows us to pass that information forward through to the buyer and also through to people like DoubleVerify as well, so that they can verify when we're having a client who wants to hit over 16s or over 18s, especially if you're an alcohol brand or something like that. We only deliver content and opportunities that meet their requirements. And that's a huge thing, I think, that's probably happened over the last 6 months. I think previously it was CTV, we just need money, let's just get scale and let's just get reach. And I think now, because we've got the greater scale, we can now actually deliver more bespoke campaigns based on contextual sort of delivery. And I think you've got companies like Iris, you've got companies like Grapeshot, you've got companies like DoubleVerify and Gum, that they're actually looking at the content on the CTV apps, they're categorizing it, and then they're enabling people to then target based on what that categorization is, which is really important.
Excellent. Kristanne, when it comes to understanding the reach of a campaign and the frequency, so before we get on to impacts, how are you seeing measurement developing in this space?
Yeah, so I think there's obviously lots of different methodologies. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And I think what a client chooses, we typically see from Kantar's perspective, is very much dependent on what the campaign's objectives are, what the research objectives are, and obviously how much budget is available for that research. So there's a number of different methods that can be used, anything from going down to those partnerships and getting that data from integrations, from passive panels where we can measure, through to more of the survey-based approaches, which use modeled algorithms to understand the opportunity of exposure. And then you can look at frequency, not just of CTV, but how that overlaps with the media, how the incremental reach might be being delivered for CTV. We work quite a lot with different methods. Probably our cross-media solution at the moment is the most used, that allows us to understand that reach of CTV as a channel, and then how that overlaps with, you know, the linear TV, the print, the other channels that a client has, so that we can help clients to understand what impact that investment is having, and I guess what levers they need to pull to be able to improve that performance from the brand perspective, but potentially also from reach for different audiences as well.
Thank you. Graeme, you were talking earlier when we were preparing around some of the work you've been doing to understand incremental reach so that you can give that reporting back to your clients.
Yeah, we've been, you know, we're a lucky company. We had a CEO and a CRO who very early understood the potential for CTV, probably 3 years ago. So we've been live in Europe for CTV over 2 years. And then a year ago, when we started to see scale, which was good scale, we realized, well, actually, the only way you're going to bridge the gap between the digital and the TV teams is understand the incremental reach from digital to TV and traditional TV. So we started working with audience projects. We've got a report we call metrics report, and actually we run it across all of our CTV campaigns, across every single impression, all the time. There's no cost to it. We just run it. And what we're able to do is we're able to, with BARB data, we're able to look at, okay, this is what we delivered on our CTV. Now, this is where all the limitations are. It's only what we see on CTV. Then look at what was delivered on a linear TV campaign, and then actually look at the incremental reach +1 figure. And to give you an example, there's a case study for Under Armour. We delivered 500,000 incremental reach users on our CTV, but 30% of them were solely unreachable on linear TV. Now, obviously, that's not looking at BVOD, that's not looking at YouTube, so there's definitely limitations there. But the fact that we can measure that and provide that incremental is just a huge benefit to clients, right?
Yeah, I think that's the question of the blind spots, and this is where we get to the demand that we're seeing from advertisers for the holistic bringing of all this together, that you've got the standard measurement currencies for TV and online, we've got CTV coming in, and how does this become a holistic view? Hitesh Bhatt from Pubmatic on the first panel was very clear about his concerns for the siloed nature of the CTV data that is out there in the market, that you've got reports being published from different smart TV providers or device manufacturers or distribution channels. And how do you see this data? I mean, this is an open question to all of you. How do you see this data coming together so that it can be unified in a more consistent way?
I think from the Kantar perspective, fragmentation has always been a challenge when we look at the digital space. It's been a growing challenge, particularly with the demise of cookies and the latest Apple updates. I think there's a number of ways that as an agency, I guess we and as an industry, we're trying to tackle some of that fragmentation. I think it's always still going to come back to what budgets are available and how, because some of the methods we have are quite expensive. So the best way to get to a holistic approach is the partnership. We've been working on something called Project Moonshot for a while now, which is really looking at partnering with the various stakeholders to try and get that passive data that allows us to understand exposure on a holistic level and kind of put everyone on that kind of level playing field to give those advertisers the insights that they're looking for. I guess with any of those, there's always going to be inherent politics and inherent requirements, and we need to make sure that we're doing it in the best possible way. So I think that there's ways to get there, but it's obviously not easy, and it's often not cheap to do it. I think there's obviously different ways that we've looked at from industries to get around that. There's the ability to use passive panels where we can meter those panelists and understand their exposure via either technology in the TVs that is measuring exposure or technologies in mobile devices that watermarks ads and it allows us to understand exposure. But again, they all come with all of these challenges when it comes to costs and feasibility and the size of campaigns of measurement, which for CTV, obviously being a growing investment, but maybe not always high enough reach to be able to use some of these methods, does mean that often we have to look at some of the more, I guess, what might be classed as traditional methods of using those models and the survey-based approaches. So I think, and I do think that as an industry, we are moving back towards more of those modeled approaches for a large portion of measurement, because realistically, the amount of work that's required and the pace of change of an industry of those technologies, we're constantly looking at ways that we can get there, but I don't think it's the simple silver bullet that I guess everyone wants.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, adding to that, I think when you look at TV, you know, for 50 years was 5 channels, and it was 5 channels on one screen. And that screen didn't matter in terms of who it was made by, what the delivery method was. And I think the problem we're going to have, and something we need to be very aware of, if we get stuck in the idea that we need to create this perfect solution, we're never going to get there. So actually, it's just about, you know, working with people like the publishers who are going to have more control than anyone else, because they're going to have and when I say publishers, whether it's they create the content or create the app, they're the ones who control the actual user. They have the relationship with the user. You then have the TV manufacturers. Now they're going to have their own solutions. You've then got set-top boxes. You've then got people who just want to distribute content. And I think really in the short term, it's just, okay, this is what we can do. Let's work to this to start off with. And then from there, let's work out where we can go. You know, what we're doing, like I say, you know, Audience Project have a 400,000 panel in the UK, 120,000 in Germany. Now that's not great, but it's better than what we've got. And it shows what we can do in the initial phase. Hopefully the next phase is we then start to work with, you know, the Project Origin, where you're bringing in YouTube data. And I think that's one step at a time is better than not making any steps at all. And I think that's what we need to be very aware of when it comes to CTV and delivery.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Graeme just said. And it is, so from a DoubleVerify perspective, one of the things that we're conscious of is that the major global brands, they're looking at CTV, and if they're going to shift revenue into CTV, they're going to take it from their linear budgets. And so the first challenge we need to face as a digital business is how do we replicate and give those advertisers, at least as a baseline, the same information as they're getting from their linear spot reports, for example. So it's not it ran in this app, it's it ran against this specific content at this specific time. And we're working with the content creators, as Graeme said. There's loads of different stakeholders involved in these, in getting these things across the line. So for us, talking to the content creators, working with a global advertiser brand who has the clout essentially to help drive this along. It's so how can we give the digital teams at the agencies, because they want this, the ability to demonstrate that incremental reach in a way that's easy for them to digest, that helps them to be operationally efficient. Because at the moment, you say we have to do this, then we do this, and we do this. We're trying to find a way of helping them to just have that data available to them at a single source.
Yeah, you've all touched on lots of these key challenges that we're facing, and with first on the increasing importance of publishers as being the source of first-party data, not just of events but of profiles, and then of how do we unify the inputs of different sources of CTV data. And I think this is where there are industry associations, TV measurement JICs, whose job is to have common standards, and there's a framework that we're working on around how do you validate the data, how do you normalize this and integrate this. And this is something that, if I take my moderator's hat on and put a Comscore hat on, Comscore's been doing for many years in the US, where we integrate cable data from 6 cable suppliers to 40 million households and 75 million TVs. We're now bringing in CTV data from 3 different vendors. And therefore we have a framework of how do you both validate, normalize and integrate that data. And that's the type of thing that needs to go through local country by country industry committees, so that there can be a transparency in that data, so that we can see stuff holistically. And then there is the question of that we're not just looking at CTV. This is part of how we're expanding TV measurement to be more granular, and then how are we doing this deduplication with digital, and how are we bringing on normal digital publishers and the likes of the Googles and the Facebooks and the TikToks and whatever. And I think you said that maybe we shouldn't be waiting for the perfect solution. And I think this is one of the challenges, is that when it was a number of years ago that Unilever issued a very comprehensive tender wanting cross-media measurement across all these countries, and it was a beautiful tender. Yes, it was a little overly ambitious, and I think that the WFA initiative, World Federation of Advertisers, came out of the response that they got back, which is, you guys are dreaming if you think this data exists. And this requires cooperation across media and across media silos. And the challenge is that if you look at the funding of media, it is predominantly done TV funds TV and digital funds digital and print funds print. And yet this is about bringing it together. And no one really has an interest in spending more money to enable that comparison, which is why I think things like Project Origin, as much as that may be causing some concerns amongst the broadcasters of, is this truly comparable? Is this going to be done in a way that is apples with apples? And can we trust that the inputs into this are similar to what has been built up through those industry currencies?
Yeah, I think that's those kind of tenders as well. They're a great thing, I think, to push the industry to understand like what is possible. Because without advertisers really pushing for those answers, do we really have the same drive as an industry to find the solutions? And I think the reality is, I think everyone wants to get to a similar place. The Facebooks and Google of the world and the different CTV providers that we have across all the different markets, I think there's an appetite there for it. And I think if we think about it from the publisher's perspective or the partner's perspectives as well, we need to get to a place where it is a fair comparison. And I think it is that 80-20 rule of, we need everyone to be comfortable that it's the best solution we can find to get to what we need to, but an understanding that there's always going to be room for improvement, and it's maybe not going to be the ideal situation. But we do want to make sure, particularly when you start looking at that extra complication of trying to put both the TV and the digital players within some kind of unified measurement solution, we need to make sure it is fair. And you're not, even if you just look at the simple investment levels in different channels, and we see on campaigns when you measure it, if a channel is given more investment, then yes, there's a plateau of a point where you can impact to a certain point, and you may reach the maximum potential for that channel. But I think it's making sure that those channels are given that opportunity to have that impact as well. And I think that's what a lot of the publishers are looking at when they're willing to participate in measurement, is just making sure that they're happy to be reported on, but it needs to be a fair view. And I think particularly what we're trying to do within the Kantar perspective is make sure that we give that fairness to all of the partners to be able to give what is a true read to the advertisers and allow them to optimize their budgets in a way that is going to have the best impact and, you know, the greatest experience for consumers as well.
Yeah, I think CTV is the first time you're actually getting that bridge between digital and TV. Yeah, everyone used to talk about TV video, like online video. It's incremental, but it's a 3-minute video on a desktop. It's got no relation to what someone's viewing on a TV. It's very different. Whereas CTV is actually on a TV, but it's you know, all of our delivery is programmatic. Whereas TV, 2% programmatic, but CTV is, and I think that's what's now starting to happen. And I think the biggest probably, and I think when you look at what's the value point, and this is what advertisers care about. They don't really care about anything else. Is I'm spending money, what's my value? What am I getting from that money? And I think that's where you've got to look at it. If you look at the quartiles of TV, the first week you drive huge reach very quickly. Second week, you're still driving reach. But then the third and fourth quartile, that price coefficient starts to decrease. You know, I mean, for you to get that 2 or 3 GRPs is extremely expensive. And that's where CTV just slots right in. It's an incremental. And I think this is where a lot of people, and we do this when we talk to all of our clients, is we're not here to take linear money. We're here to make linear work better. And that's the key. If you're always going to have £1 million ad on a TV, it's going to be far more efficient than anything else. If you remove that last 10% budget, I can make that work harder than what you are doing on your linear TV. And that's all of the proof points we've had for all of our campaigns has all been about that. And I think that's the key on an ROI perspective, but also on a measurement perspective. It's just, it's that 80-20. It's just making sure we understand enough to show the value of what CTV brings to your TV campaign.
Yeah, and I think that probably actually links back somewhat to what you mentioned earlier, Graeme, about the context. And so when you're looking at that difference between, you know, those impressions on digital devices versus the TV, a lot of it is about that context and the mindset that consumers are in when they're being exposed to it. And I think that is becoming more important, particularly with the technology changes that are happening. It's really looking at what is the context in which my advertising is being delivered, and is that appropriate for the advertising content and the budgets and whatever else your objectives are around that. But I think the context is particularly important to understanding why your campaign isn't working well.
Yeah, agreed.
And was there something you were wanting to add there?
No, just to Kristanne's point about essentially engaging with or creating that level playing field of making sure that publishers and broadcasters feel like if they're opening themselves up to be measured, that they are going to be given, they are going to be put on a fair playing field. And that's the key to how we approach this, and we think it should be approached in general, is any data that is provided to an advertiser that relates to a publisher or a broadcaster is made available to them as well. So there's never a kind of we're talking about you but not to you situation. It's completely the opposite. It's like, right, these are the parameters that the advertisers set. This is where you are performing right now. These are the opportunities that you have to improve on the KPIs against the KPIs that the advertiser has set. So we definitely need to approach it from that perspective. It's not a school report, it's a means of essentially making sure that all parties involved can collaborate and improve and deliver for the advertiser.
Absolutely. I think just going back to the point you made there, Graeme, that about the CTV being a catalyst in bringing digital and TV together because of the dynamic programmatic nature of CTV. You know, it is worth also pointing out the development of addressable TV on top of linear with things like AdSmart, the growth of HBB TV, and the possibilities that may open up. That there are general challenges in the measurement of TV, and I think it's also important that we see CTV, well, as an advertiser, it's to do with the AVOD dynamic delivery, but from a measurement company, CTV, smart TVs give off data that covers linear consumption as well as the CTV inventory. And that therefore helps to enhance measurement alongside what we can get from set-top boxes. So just aware that we've probably got 10 minutes to go, just encouraging folks to do submit some questions before we'll come in about 5 minutes to those. So Kristanne, I just wanted to, Kristanne, wanted to come back to look at the whole ROI and KPIs. Just what where do you tend to guide customers, or how are the decisions being made around what kind of KPIs they're running on campaigns?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes, so I guess when we have a client that comes to us and they're looking for measurement, firstly, you want to understand what their campaign objectives are. So what are they trying to achieve with that campaign and overall, and then also by channel. So every channel we know, like, typically when you see a campaign performing well, it's because each channel has been given its specific objective. And for instance, if you have CTV on that plan, it's what are you expecting CTV to deliver over and above the other media that you're buying? Is that incremental reach? Are you targeting a specific niche audience, and therefore you're expecting certain messages to be delivered in certain ways? So I think understanding what the objectives of the campaign are key to us understanding then what methods of research we would look to offer to a client. So anything from, so I guess there's sort of the audience verification. So if they're looking at more kind of, have they reached the right audience? And there's sometimes that we would look at really saying something like DoubleVerify or Comscore might have more appropriate offers for kind of that brand safety and those kind of things. If they're coming more to the reach and frequency, we have some kind of solutions that range really, like I mentioned, from survey-based through to passive tracking, each of which come with different pros and cons and each with different budgets. And so a lot of it will then come down to what sort of budget are you looking at, and what is your objective out of the research? Is it a one-time campaign measurement, or are we looking at broader learnings? Are we looking at trying to develop more kind of packs that could be used by your sales teams or by your insights teams to better understand how to plan? And so once we get into the what those objectives are, not just for the campaign, but for your research and what budgets you have, then we'll start to look at which sort of methods really are the most appropriate. But generally, I think I did mention, I think as an industry, we are moving more to, even if we do have passive data sources, it's integrating the more analytical modeled approaches that we've built from historical data sets and things like that as well. Because I think the industry is becoming more fragmented. I think the methods that we have to connect the dots on a lot of our research practices are becoming more complex. And then obviously as the privacy legislations change as well, it becomes, I think really we're adapting, but yeah, I think it's really just, there's a few solutions that we know, and then some that we know we're trying to work through, and really it just comes down to what the client's objectives are.
Thank you. We do have one question from the audience. It's a very good question to do with consent, but I'm actually going to suggest that is submitted to the next panel, since that's specifically on privacy and consent, and we've got 2 minutes 46 seconds remaining. Let me just throw out a general open question of, are you seeing any variances by market or anything that excites you about the future of TV measurement? Maybe, CTV measurement. Dan, go first.
Sure. So in terms of what's exciting, it's the fast growth, it's the opportunities to measure in the same way as we do as digital video, and it's the potential to be on the biggest screen in the house. It's where families are together. To me, television has always been the most engaging form of advertising, the best creatives surrounded by some of the best content. So to be able to expand that and take the technology that we have in digital and use it to build on that for a user experience, but then also for ROI for advertisers, I think is amazing.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think Dan covered most of it there very well. I would say the other thing is by market. I think the UK is the most advanced in Europe at the moment. We're delivering measurement. We're launching measurement in Germany. Then next will be France and in Spain. I think the key thing is, I keep hearing it all day. It's really annoyed me. I was going to say a bad word there, but it's really annoyed me. There is scale. We reach 11 million households in the UK. We reach 7 million in Germany. We reach 24 million in Spain, 4 million in Italy, and 3 million in France. That's scale. So there is scale. The next stage is actually targeting and attribution. That's what actually we should be getting to, so that we can actually make it better than what is done on TV at the moment. You can target the audiences that you're measuring, and then you can do attribution on site visits. We're already live with TV Squared and Adelyzer. There's lots of things you can do on CTV, which is very digital, that improves what is happening on TV. And I think that's the new thing.
Wonderful. And 45 seconds, Kristanne, final words?
Yeah, I think for me, I think the exciting bit with CTV is really the opportunity there, and the different, you mentioned the different formats that are being created. I think there's just so much potential in the formats and then the contexts that you're delivering your advertising to. I think it will open up new opportunities, and I think it's going to be a constant chase of measurement, but I think that's what keeps the industry for me, interesting. The constant change means that you're never going to get bored.
Excellent. I think we'll wrap up there, but just for me to say, I'm certainly encouraged to see various of the industry measurement associations starting to look at how they can onboard CTV data into the core currencies, how we've seen in the Netherlands and Switzerland the overlap between digital and TV, as well as things like Project Origin. It may still be a long journey, but we certainly seem to be heading in the right direction. Okay, thanks to you, David.
Thank you, Paul, and all the panelists for your views. I'm sure you'll agree that there's much food for thought here, and it's great to hear that the future looks very bright for measurement and return on investment in connected TV. But as you highlighted, it will require industry collaboration.